wide Eastern Front winter landscape. What does the absolute peak of human courage look like? Is it found in the charge of 1,000 men, or in the thunder of a massive armored assault? Or can it be found in the solitary, desperate stand of a single soldier, armed with little more than sheer will, holding a shattered village against an overwhelming enemy force? This is not a myth, nor a work of fiction.
Close up a Krupin's eyes. This is the story of a reality so stark, so unbelievable, that it would pass into legend. A story from the frozen hell of the Eastern Front, where one man, against all odds and all reason, held an entire village for 3 days, alone. In late January of 1944, in the smoldering ruins of the Ukrainian village of Davidovka, a lone Soviet soldier, his unit annihilated, his position surrounded, would make a decision that defied every instinct of self-preservation. He would choose to stay. This is the story of that stand.
Soviet regiment advancing in snowstorm. To understand the magnitude of this feat, we must first set the stage. By the winter of 1944, the colossal struggle between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union had reached a fever pitch. The tide was turning, slowly and bloodily, in favor of the Red Army. After the monumental victory at Kursk, Soviet forces were on a relentless westward push, an offensive that stretched the German lines to their breaking point. The landscape was a monochrome nightmare of deep snow, frozen ground, and howling winds that stole the breath from a man's lungs. Krupin, cleaning his rifle in dugout. It was in this context that the 1128th Rifle Regiment of the 336th Rifle Division was engaged in brutal, localized fighting to clear a cluster of villages near the Dnieper River. Among its ranks was a 19-year-old soldier named Vladimir Timofeyevich Krupin. He was not an officer, not a decorated hero, but a simple rifleman, a Krasnarmeyets. His world was his Mosin Nagant rifle, his entrenching tool, his comrades, and the orders he was given.
Battle map with officers. The strategic value of Davidovka was tactical. It was a stepping stone, a minor strong point on a map in some colonel's headquarters. But for the soldiers ordered to take it and hold it, it was everything. House-to-house fighting. On the morning of January 24th, a company-strength element of the 1128th fought its way into Davidovka against fierce resistance from elements of the German 88th Infantry Division. The fighting was house to house, close quarters, and merciless. Surviving platoon, digging in. By day's end, the Soviets had secured the village, but at a terrible cost. Their company was reduced to a battered platoon of just over 30 exhausted men. They dug in among the shattered husks of peasant huts, their fields of fire covering the main approaches from the west and south. The order was simple: hold the village at all costs, prevent a German counterattack from using it as a springboard. Little did they know how severely that order would be tested, and who would be left to fulfill it. Soviet sentry on night watch. The silence that fell over Davidovka on the night of the 24th was uneasy, broken only by the moan of the wind and the crackle of dying fires. The men, their greatcoats stiff with frost, took turns on watch, their eyes straining against the darkness beyond the village perimeter. The sense of being watched,
of a predator circling just out of sight was palpable. Fear gripped the men, a cold, sharp fear that was different from the heat of battle. It was the anxiety of the waiting, the knowledge that the German army was not in the habit of surrendering ground without a fight.
Commander viewing counterattack through binoculars. Their fears were confirmed at first light on January 25th. A distant rumble grew into a recognizable clatter and roar. Through binoculars, the Soviet commander saw them, a German counterattack force, not just a probing patrol, but a proper assault group. German Stug 3s and infantry advancing. Estimates from later reports suggest it was at least a reinforced company, over 150 men, supported by 2 Stug 3 assault guns. These metal beasts, with their low silhouettes and powerful 75mm main guns, were infantry killers. They advanced methodically, their tracks churning the snow into muddy slush, German infantry in their distinctive Feldgrau uniforms advancing in their wake. Soviet mortar team in action. The battle for Davidovka began in earnest. Soviet mortar teams laid down a desperate barrage, but their ammunition was low. Anti-tank rifles pinged harmlessly off the frontal armor of the Stugs. The German assault guns began systematically blasting the Soviet positions. Hut exploding from shell impact. One by one, the huts serving as strongpoints were obliterated in clouds of splinters and dust. The deafening roar of the high-explosive shells was matched by the relentless stutter of German MG-42 machine guns, a sound the Soviets called the Hitler's Bawsaw. By 1400 hours, the situation was critical. The Soviet platoon had been decimated. German infantry had infiltrated the outer edges of the village, and close-quarter fighting erupted in the streets. The Soviet commander was killed by a sniper's bullet, and with his death, any coordinated defense collapsed. It became a battle of small groups, then of individuals. Vladimir Krupin, fighting from a shell crater, then from behind a broken wall, found himself separated from the remnants of his unit. German-occupied village at night. By nightfall on the 25th, the village of Davidovka grew quiet once more. But this silence was different. It was the silence of the grave. The German force, believing they had crushed all resistance, consolidated their positions. They occupied the more intact buildings on the western side, posting sentries and settling in for the night. German-occupied village at night.
Unbeknownst to them, they did not fully control Davidovka. In the eastern part of the village, hidden in the cellar of a half-demolished house, surrounded by the frozen bodies of his comrades, was Vladimir Krupin. He was wounded, with a shrapnel gash on his arm, exhausted and utterly alone. He assessed his situation. A few dozen rounds for his Mosin Nagant, 2 fragmentation grenades, and half a loaf of frozen bread. The rest of his regiment was miles away, unaware of the catastrophe that had befallen the company in Davidovka. What happened next would become the stuff of legend.
Krupin's decision to stay and fight, dawned on January 26th, broke over a village that, for all intents and purposes, was in German hands. Sentries patrolled, smoke rose from field kitchens, and the sounds of an occupied position filled the air. For Vladimir Krupin, peering from his cellar hideout, the world had shrunk to this tiny, ruined corner of the front. He was surrounded by at least 150 enemy soldiers. To attempt to break out across the open, snow-covered fields was suicide. To stay meant almost certain capture or death. This was the impossible situation. He was cut off, outnumbered, and outgunned to an unimaginable degree. But then a thought, born of desperation and a stubborn sense of duty, took hold. The order had been to hold the village. He was still in the village. The order still stood. His decision was made. He would not flee. He would not surrender. He would fight.
His war became a ghost's war. He was no longer a soldier in a line unit. He was a phantom, a one-man insurgency haunting the ruins of his former position.
Krupin, moving through ruins. He carefully moved from one destroyed building to the next, using rubble and communication trenches as his avenues of movement.
German sentry post targeted by Krupin. His first target was a two-man German sentry post set up near the village well. He waited, his breath misting in the frigid air, his finger numb on the trigger.
The first shot, muzzle flash. A single, carefully aimed shot rang out, startlingly loud in the morning quiet.
German sentry falls, other confused. One German soldier fell. Before his comrade could even locate the source of the shot, Krupin had already displaced, melting back into the ruins. Confusion began to spread among the Germans.
Krupin displacing after the shot. This was Krupin's strategy. He would not present a fixed target. He became a master of deception. Composite of Krupin's deceptive movements. He would fire a shot from the northern end of the village, then quickly and silently move several hundred yards to the south to fire another. Grenade rolled into German-occupied hut. He used his two grenades with devastating psychological effect, rolling one into a hut where a squad of Germans was resting, the explosion sowing panic and the belief that a significant partisan force was operating within the village. Aftermath of grenade explosion. The German response was initially one of confusion, then of growing frustration and anger. German sergeants shouting conflicting orders. They were being harassed, picked off, and they couldn't find the enemy.
German patrols sweeping eastern sector. Patrols were sent out to sweep the eastern sector. Krupin, knowing the terrain intimately, would let them pass, then engage them from the rear.
Krupin ambushing patrol from rear. He used the element of surprise with brutal efficiency. A burst of machine gun fire would rake a patrol from a previously cleared building. German officer struck by sniper shot. A lone sniper shot would take down a junior officer. The Germans began to suffer casualties from an enemy they could not see, could not pin down, and could not quantify. The German field aid station with wounded. For Krupin, those 3 days and 2 nights were an endless cycle of exhaustion, terror, and resolve. Krupin's exhaustion in an attic. He slept in minute-long fits, jerking awake at every sound.
Krupin's hands, cold and raw. The bitter cold was a constant enemy, threatening him with hypothermia. His wounds ached. His hunger was a sharp pain in his gut, and his thirst was so severe he resorted to sucking on handfuls of snow.
Krupin pressed against a wall, hiding. The psychological toll was immense. He was alone with the dead, surrounded by the living who wanted him dead. Every shadow was a threat, every sound a potential discovery. Yet he held his nerve. He was no longer just holding a position on a map. He was holding the line between his own spirit and utter despair.
German commander in crisis. By the third day, January 27th, the German commander in Davidovka was facing a crisis of his own. His force, tasked with securing this flank, was being bled dry by a phantom. Casualties mounted from constant harassing attacks. Morale was plummeting. The Germans were convinced they were facing not one man, but a determined and well-organized group of Soviet stragglers, perhaps even a Spetsnaz sabotage unit. They had no idea their entire predicament was the work of a single, determined 19-year-old. This misapprehension was Krupin's greatest weapon.
German mortar saturation fire. The German response became increasingly heavy-handed and consequently more predictable. They began to use mortars and machine guns to saturation fire areas of the village they suspected contained the Soviet holdouts. This wasted ammunition and further fixed their attention inward on the village itself rather than outward from where the real threat was now approaching. Close-up of Krupin's rifle, bolt action. For Vladimir Krupin, the turning point was not a single act of heroism, but the cumulative effect of his relentless asymmetrical warfare. His heroic decision was not made once, back in the cellar on the first night, but was remade every minute of every hour. It was the decision to take one more shot, to move one more time, to stay awake for one more minute, to hold on just a little longer. He was overcoming the odds not with a single glorious charge, but with 1,000 small, brutal acts of defiance. Krupin, hearing distant thunder, the sound he had been praying for, finally reached his ears on the afternoon of the 27th.
View of distant artillery flashes. It was a distant but growing thunder from the east. Not the sharp report of small arms or the crump of mortars, but the deep rumbling roar of tank engines and the unmistakable report of Soviet artillery preparation. The Red Army was counterattacking.
German chaos as relief force approaches. As the roar of the approaching Soviet forces grew louder, the German position in Davidovka descended into chaos. The harassing fire from within their own lines, which they had been unable to suppress, now became a critical distraction at the worst possible moment.
While they were trying to form a defense against the external attack, Krupin, seeing his moment, intensified his efforts. He fired into German formations, attempting to set up defensive positions. He created noise and confusion in their rear, making them believe they were about to be assaulted from behind.
T-34 smashing into village. When the lead T-34 tanks of the Soviet relief force smashed into the village outskirts, they encountered a disorganized and disoriented enemy. The German defense was fragmented, their cohesion broken by 3 days of psychological warfare.
German rout. The battle was short and vicious. The German force, believing itself caught between a major Soviet assault from the front and a significant partisan force in the rear, broke and retreated in disorder, leaving behind their dead, wounded, and a significant amount of equipment.
Soviet troops discovering German casualties. As Soviet infantry from the 128th Regiment fanned out through the now secure village, they made a discovery that defied belief. Krupin emerging from ruins. From the ruins, a single emaciated and frostbitten figure emerged, his uniform in tatters, still clutching his Mosin Nagant. It was Vladimir Krupin. He was the only Soviet soldier left alive in Davidovka. The scene that greeted the reinforcements was a testament to his solitary struggle. The bodies of over 24 German soldiers lay scattered through the eastern part of the village, the result of his 3-day campaign of terror. Soviet sergeant recognizing Krupin. The cost had been immense. His entire company had been wiped out. Krupin himself was severely wounded, suffering from exposure, exhaustion, and combat stress. Wide shot of devastated village. But his stand had achieved the impossible. He had single-handedly denied the German army full control of a strategic village for 3 critical days. He had pinned down a vastly superior enemy force, inflicted disproportionate casualties, and sowed such confusion that he directly contributed to the ease with which the relieving Soviet forces recaptured the position.
Krupin in field hospital. The historical significance of Krupin's stand was immediately recognized.
Hero of the Soviet Union award ceremony. He was swiftly awarded the highest military honor the Soviet Union could bestow, the title of Hero of the Soviet Union, along with the Order of Lenin and the Gold Star Medal. Close-up of Gold Star Medal. His story was plastered across newspapers and recruitment posters, a symbol of the courage, sacrifice, and stubborn resilience of the common Soviet soldier. Propaganda poster of Krupin. But beyond the propaganda value, his actions stand as a timeless study in the power of the human will. Vladimir Krupin was not a Superman. He was a young man, scared and alone. Yet, in a moment of supreme crisis, he found a resolve that defied all military logic. He demonstrated that a single soldier, armed with courage, ingenuity, and an unbreakable spirit, could alter the tactical reality of a battlefield and become a legend etched forever in the annals of military history. Frozen Eastern Front landscape. The stand of Vladimir Krupin at Davidovka was a feat of almost mythical proportions, yet it was stark, brutal reality. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War, a conflict that redefined the limits of human endurance and sacrifice. Subscribe to WW2-Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history,
Krupin alone in cellar, back to life.
the decision on his face, first shot from ruins,
Grenade rowing into hut. German confusion and frustration. Krupin's exhaustion and resolve.
T-34s breaking into village.
Krupin emerging from ruins.
Moment of recognition with comrades. Hero of the Soviet Union Medal.